Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Xamarin University and to a guest lecture with Michael Stonis. And so Michael's going to walk us through using analytics in our mobile application. So this should be pretty exciting. I know he's got some great stuff that he plans to walk through, including showing you how to actually add multiple vendors' analytics support into your apps. So just as a quick introduction, I've known Michael for quite a long time. He's a consultant that does a lot of work in the Xamarin space. He has a company, 8bot, that does a lot of consulting, and so you can contact him offline if you're interested in that. But he's also a guest lecturer for Xamarin University. So when we take our offsite groups together and kind of bring all the Xamarin University trainers together to kind of talk about where Xamarin University is going, Michael's one of the lecturers that fills in for us, and then he's also responsible for some of our classroom training pieces. So he works across the board as an all-around super smart guy that we really like to work with. And so Michael, how's it going in Chicago today?
It's very nice. Thanks for the introduction there, Mark. Yeah, Chicago's doing all right. It's unseasonably warm, and so I am not going to complain about that in any way, shape, or form.
Well, you know, the minute you start complaining, that's when that's going to change. So you need to be a little bit cautious about your wording there.
Yeah, it's going to turn fast. As soon as I blink my eyes, I'm going to go out today, and I'll go out tonight, and I'll have to put a coat on and all that.
That's exactly right. It's going to snow tonight. You watch.
Yeah, it will. Trust me, it will.
All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to Michael. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, Mark, for the kind words. For anybody who's had to sit in on my trainings, I'm going to apologize up front. I do my best, but here's another thing you could hang out with me for another hour or so. But yeah, so today, like Mark mentioned, what we're going to do is we're going to be talking through adding mobile analytics to our applications, right? So it's something that I feel like in sort of doing mobile development for a while here, that's sort of overlooked to a large extent. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I feel like it's one of those things when we talk about the web, it's a must-do type of thing. But when we talk about mobile applications, a little bit overlooked. So hopefully give you guys some insight into it, how we can make our apps better. How we can make our apps better. And let me show my other screen. There we go. Hopefully we're showing the right screen now. How we can make our apps a little bit better here, and actually get that analytics integrated into our platform. Right? So for anybody who doesn't know me, again, my name is Mike Stonis. I'm the president and architect, I guess, over here at 8bot, where we do a lot of enterprise mobile application development. So if you've got a business and you guys are looking to make the jump to mobile, and you've got really good .NET developers, what we like to do is help you get in there, get up and running, maybe help you build out your first application or build out a proof of concept. And then do training and stuff like that to make sure that your developers are totally up to speed on how to do iOS and Android and Windows Phone development. Also was awarded with Xamarin MVP over the last year, so something I'm still super excited about. Great community to be a part of. Been working with Xamarin for quite a long time now, all the way back at the very early days. Going all the way back, I guess, kind of from the very beginning. So something I'm still really excited about. Still a platform that I love using and always love talking about. So again, if anybody has any questions, I'll give some contact information at the end, but feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments. All right, so what we want to talk about here for today then is our mobile analytics. We're going to kind of break it into three main parts. Our first part here is, why do we want to add analytics into our applications? What can we learn? What's the whole point? How do we get it set up, or why would we want to get it set up, and things like that. From there, what I want to talk about is how we can configure our applications or prepare our applications to be integrated with analytics. So, if we've got an application maybe that we've built, or if we're coming in for a brand new application, what are some of the real small tweaks or some of the design decisions that we can make to ensure that adding analytics isn't so heavy that it's just a big burden on our team or anything like that, and becomes kind of an easy thing to implement. And then finally, what we're going to do, time permitting, I think we can make it, is we're going to look at integrating 6 different analytics providers. There's all different kinds of analytics providers. There's way more than 6 available to us, but I picked 6 ones that I know that my clients have used before, that I've used in the past, that I've been happy with, and we'll talk about pros and cons, and we'll actually look at some code on how we get all of them set up, what it takes to get them set up, and everything like that. So along the way, too, if anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to jump out in the chat and let me know. I'd be glad to answer anything that you have as we move along our way. All right. So with that, why do we want analytics, right? What is it going to provide? When we talk about building our applications, it kind of looks something like this. It's not going to be exactly this, but it might, kind of look something like this, where we come up with an idea. Hey, I want to build this new application to track such and such, or I want to build this new application to serve an industry. We spend all this time researching. We gather all the information. We talk to clients. We talk to potential end users and things like that. We gather all the information for what we think is going to be a great application. We then go in, design our application, put it all together, make sure everything looks great, make sure we get all of our design ready, sit down and develop it, right? We write all this code, and at this point in time, we're maybe a few months in, maybe a year in to developing our application, and then we hit this part where we need to take our application and distribute it, right? So we go out to the iTunes Store, we go out to the Google Play Store, something like that, we push our application out, and then I know a lot of people just kind of play the waiting game. So, hey, we've developed this really cool application. We think that the industry is going to love it. We know that we love it. We did such a great job out here, but we push it out, and it's kind of the last time we hear about it. In a lot of ways, if we think about it, it's kind of like a message in a bottle, right? We take it, throw it out, write this thing, build this application. If we're talking about a message in a bottle, we take this message, put it in our bottle, throw it in the sea, and hopefully we'll hear something about it later on. If anybody here has ever developed an application, especially a consumer application, you know that a lot of times when you get feedback, it's not always the kind of feedback that you want. And if I think of myself as a user of applications too, usually the only time I ever speak up about anything is when I'm complaining, right? So if an application crashes on me, if things take too long to load, if a feature is not working as expected, that's when I kind of speak up. But if everything's working normally, or if everything's kind of just going along its way, if everything looks good, I never really say anything. And so, for us as developers, there's this large, hopefully large group of people out there that's using our application and love it, but we never get that feedback from them. We never really get good feedback from them to know, how they're really using our application, how they're engaging with our application, and things like that. So the whole idea here that we have analytics is that we need that feedback. Right? If we just build an application, even if it's the best application out there, and just throw it out into the store, we don't know, really how often people are using it. Do they use all the features in our applications? Are there a lot of people using it? Are there just a few people using it? Is our application working the way that we expect it to? Is it actually loading up data fast? Are APIs behaving the way that we expect them to? Is it reliable? This one's like a super important piece here. If our application crashes, or if our application's not really working as intended, these are all things that we really need good pieces of feedback on that we really, may not have right out of the box here. And if we think about it, and if we break these things down, they kind of fall into these key metrics. Depending on who you talk to, they might slice and dice these a little bit different, but I kind of group these into these 5 different categories here of metrics that I feel are really important to us as application developers. Our first one here is going to be our user group, right? So when we develop an application, we're targeting a certain set of users. If you're building an application to serve an industry, you want to make sure that you're, getting the application to those industry people. If you're developing a video game, you might be developing that game to target a certain subset of users. So one of our first key metrics here is just to ensure, who our users are, and maybe to ensure that we're fitting the right demographics. So, again, if we're building a game, a video game or something like that, fast-paced video game, our target demographic might be males between the age of 18 and 36. But what we might find out is that it's actually super popular with females between the age of, maybe 25 and to 40 or something like that. And so, we need to know that key piece of information, because without that, we might not know who our real user base is. We want to find out, hey, if we're showing ads, are we showing the right ads? If we're, creating icons and doing imagery, does it actually connect with our user base? So that first key item here, those users, is super important. Second then is engagement. So, if we have a lot of users that maybe download our application, are they actually using it over time? So do we get a lot of people that download the app, maybe use it once, and then never come back again? Or do we have a really small, like niche market of users that use the app every single day, right? With analytics, we could find those things out. How often do our users come into our application? When they come into our application, how much time do they spend in it? Is it just a few seconds? Is it a few minutes? Is it their whole day? It's really good information for us to have because, again, if we get a lot of downloads, that's one thing, but if we don't get a lot of actual interaction with our application, we might be missing something all the way around. Next up is our screen flow and events. Okay, so this one I think is really important, especially for us as developers, to think about when we're adding new features and functionality into our application, or after we add new features and functionality into our application, to find out how much it's actually being used. Okay, so kind of give a good example of this. We have one of our clients here. I'm not going to name names or anything like that, but we have one of our clients here who, sort of every single time they went to a trade show, got a lot of feedback saying, hey, we need X, Y, and Z feature. Hey, we need this new feature here. And the thing about it was, when they kept on getting this feedback, we need this new feature, we need this new feature. So they went ahead, they spent some time developing out that feature, spent a bit of time actually developing out that feature. It wasn't exactly straightforward. Pushed it out there into the App Store. We had some analytics. And then we found out that like less than 1% of people ever used that feature, right? So it was one of these things where they had a very vocal minority, and they said, we must have it, we must have it, we must have it, just to turn out to find out that really not a lot of people use that information or had actually pulled together that information. So in that case, it's one of those things that they could find out that, hey, we might have dumped all this time into it up front, but at least we know that we don't need to continue spending time on it, or maybe we don't need to focus on it. We've got other things. And likewise, same client was able to look at other pieces of their application that they thought nobody used, only to find out later after we put analytics into their application, that lots of people were going into. So screen flow and eventing, is super important to find out. Are users clicking those buttons? Are they using parts of our applications? How do they get from point A to point B? And all that kind of good information. Next up then are our conversions. So if we have an application that maybe makes sales of products or things like that, we want to make sure that we can drive our users to those sales or to those right places. So we want to ensure that if we are going through a workflow or something like that where people are putting items into a basket, we want to make sure that people aren't sort of leaving, after they've gone and selected items and put them in a basket. We want to actually make sure that they take those items and give us money for them, right, or buy our widgets that we're selling out there. So conversions could be really important depending on your application to ensure that not only are you just getting sort of the user behavior that you want with that screen flow, but they're actually taking the guided actions that you want them to. All right. Finally, then, we have performance, and this is kind of a catch-all area here, but for performance in particular, what I mean by that is, is our app performing as we expect? Are we ensuring that, when we load data from our API in a real world, that it's coming in as quick and as, in a timely manner as we possibly can have it? Again, are we ensuring that our application isn't crashing out, or that our application isn't encountering bugs or things like that that are preventing our users from running the application? And this is one of those things that we can use to be a little bit more proactive about and ensure that, hey, we're seeing some kind of weird bugs come through here. Maybe we can put out a new build, or maybe we could start testing against those before we actually, before our users come back to us and let us know about those, right? Because if we get to the point where our users are going out into the App Store and complaining, you can ensure that your 5-star ratings on your apps are going to go down to 3 or 2 or 1 star or something like that. So we do want to make sure here that we get all that kind of performance information and capture that as much as we can, again, so that we can ensure that, hey, before our users tell us that something's going on, that we can address that and we can actually take care of it. And again, a kind of last note here on performance. Works on my machine only goes so far in the real world. So, if we work, if you're like me and you've got a super high-speed internet connection and you're on LTE and things like that, you may never notice that your app is working slow until you get it out in some rural applications or some places where people have spotty internet connection, and finding out that information is important. So, again, lots of different ways we can look at these metrics, but these are kind of the 5 that I break them down as I feel that they're important here. Sure. So before we go on, it looks like we've got 2 questions in here. Let me read through the first question here. So when collecting user-related metrics, in the info, if the info collected can identify users, how do you recommend dealing with data protection legislation? For example, in the UK, if info is collected is user identifiable, we have to register under the Data Protection Act. How do you recommend handling this with a global product? That's a great question. Obviously, if you are going to be collecting identifiable information like, user location along with, names and email addresses and everything like that, you want to make sure that you probably up front have some kind of an agreement for your users to work through. And if you do have an application that is globally, is going to be provided globally, you may want to do some inspection, either based on the app store that you're using, or if you've got some information that you can quickly gather, anonymously about sort of their rough location. So if somebody's coming from the US or if somebody's coming from the UK, maybe show different end user license agreements and things like that, just to ensure that whatever those local laws are, that your user is actually, that your users are or that you're notifying your users properly about the data that you're capturing and that you are following all local laws. If you are unsure, it's always good, maybe to just look online, see if you can get some feedback on what sort of the best practices are for that type of situation. But at the end of the day, we got to make sure that we follow all the laws. If you're super concerned about it, or if you're not sure that you're going to be able to make it, you may want to scale back the amount of information that you collect, or you may want to anonymously collect information about your users, and then potentially roll out as you're more comfortable or as you feel like you've got your information collected there a little bit better. Ensure that you've got that, or roll out those features at that point in time. Hopefully that answered your question a little bit there. Let me know or give me some feedback if you need anything else. Oh, sure. And then we had another question, if I could talk about conversion again. Sure. So conversion is this idea of we have a goal for our users. So, our end goal, let's say I've got an application where you can design a t-shirt for yourself and then order a t-shirt and get your cool print on it or get some text on it, right? The idea behind conversion there is that we want our users not to just use the application, but in our case, if we're using this application to sell t-shirts, is we want our users to go through the full workflow and actually purchase a t-shirt. So for us, a conversion is having a user, you could kind of think of it as a goal. Our goal for that user is to have them buy t-shirts. So tracking conversions is one of those things. It's kind of that idea that we have particular goals for our users, and we want our users to meet those goals. So just putting some metrics in there in our application to make sure that, hey, the user clicked the Pay Now button or things like that. So that's kind of the rough idea for conversions. Again, that's just one example. Depending on the application that you're building there, you may have a totally different use case for your conversion. If you want users to submit data or something like that, you might have, that might be what your goals are. But again, those ideas behind conversions, you can kind of think of them as the goals. So it's not only do you want to see if your user is using your application, but you want to ensure that they're using your application in a very particular manner, or that they're doing certain behaviors that you want them to. Again, great question. Let me know if I can provide any more information on that or any more details there for conversion. Give it a second here. If you do have anything, just drop it out there in the questions again, and I'll do my best to follow up on that. Well, let's kind of configure, or let's move on here to our next section here for today. So we kind of have an idea, right? We've got an idea of those 5 main metrics that we want to capture. The next thing I want to talk about is how do we configure our application so that we can capture those metrics. And really what it's going to come down to, and I'll show you some examples in code here, but really what it's going to come down to is reduce, reuse, and recycle, right? You probably have all heard this before. When we capture metrics, or when we want to introduce metrics into our application, the one thing that's going to become clear is that we want to redo a lot of the same work over and over and over. And what I see a lot of people do when they're first getting metrics set up in their application is they build them or implement them in a very ad hoc manner. So they say, hey, when a user clicks just this one particular button, track this event. Or for each new page that I make in my application, track this event. And they keep on rewriting those things over and over and over for each and every page. What we want to do is make implementing analytics be as hands-off and as easy as possible for us. So what I like to do next here is just kind of work through or talk through a sample application where we've got some of these analytics components set up for us, and explain, specifically why these make our lives a little bit easier here, and what we can do, some simple steps that we can do to make integrating analytics even easier. So let's go take a peek at some code. All right, so let me switch over here to my desktop, and we're just going to work through here. I've built a sample application out here I called Xamalytics. It's got a bunch of different analytics providers in it, but it's just a sample app. This isn't anything, I'll give a quick prefix on here. This might not be exactly everything you should do in a production environment, but I just kind of want to give everybody an idea or kind of spark some ideas in your head for how you can introduce some analytics components here. So to start off with, what we have here is a Xamarin.Forms application. So we've got our core project out here. We've got one project for Android, one for iOS, and then we've got these separate services as well that we'll look at here in just a few minutes for providing some additional feedback. If we run our application here, just go ahead and take a visual look at it. You can see it's kind of a simple application here. So we'll just say, what's my username? Mike. What's my password? Password 1, 2, 3. That's the password I use for all my bank accounts too, if anybody wants it. So we've got a simple sign in here, username and our password. We can log into our application. You can see we've got something like a quick home page here that just displays some information to us. And then finally, our application here is going to ask us, what's our favorite platform for video games, right? You an arcade person? Are you a PlayStation person? Or maybe finally here, are you an Xbox person? If anybody knows me, the answer here is arcade. I own a couple arcade machines and pinball machines and stuff like that, but just a sample application to kind of give you an idea. It's pretty typical. The workflow here is pretty typical of what we might build out. It's a little plain, but gives us an idea of what our sample app would look like, right? So a couple of screens that we work through, and with data that we want to capture on each and every screen. Okay, so coming back here, let me just jump back a few slides. Coming back here, like I said, what we want to do is we want to hit these 5 key points. We want to find out information about our users. We want to find out how they're using our application, maybe when they're using our application, how often they use our application. We want to find out things like screen flow, so how they go from screen to screen. We also want to find out if they do particular events. So if they click on something that's really important to us, we want to find out that information because, again, if it's something that's driving sales for our company, it's really important for us to know how many times our user clicks that bill me button or clicks that button like that. And then finally, we want to look at performance here as well. Okay, so back out here in our code, like I mentioned, what I notice here a lot of times is that people set up a lot of ad hoc pieces. So the first thing I want to talk about here are base classes. When you're doing analytics, base classes are your best friend. Right? It goes back to that reduce, reuse, recycle kind of idea. So typically when we build out a Xamarin.Forms application, what we might do first is build out something here. If we just take a look at this code, let me make this a little bigger here. If we take a look at our code here, we might build out something like a navigation page, which then first pushes something like a login page. All right? And on our login page, we might want to capture information about who logged in. How long they spent on that page, when what time they went to that page and things like that. Typically, when I see people do that, they'll go into the application or they'll go into that page itself, and they'll start putting in little points in here, and they'll say, hey, grab the user, start in a new instance of login, or put in some information here when our user clicked. And I'll talk about this stuff in just a second, so don't worry about that. But they'll start sprinkling in little bits of analytics into each one of their pages. My first recommendation here on a larger scale is consider building out base classes for your reusable components in your application. So in this case here, you'll see I've got this login page, and it's going to be using this base class of content page base, right? And this is just, at its core, a regular Xamarin.Forms content page. Not anything, super special about it that we're tracking at this point in time. But what we are going to do in here is inside of this is we'll capture some information, like we'll get a page name. This might be a name that we'll use to display a title or something like that on our page, but it'll also be a variable that we'll hold on to for later. Additionally then, what we want to do is start sprinkling in analytics components. So in this case, you can see I've got on our parent being set, so when our page is being added onto our stack here, we could track when our user has been, or when our page rather, has been displayed to our user, or maybe when it's been unloaded, right? So we could start tracking this stuff globally and universally so that I know that each time I need to create a new content page, that I don't need to overthink about, how do I start tracking when a user goes into a page or leaves a page or anything like that. I could kind of get it for free, right? So here, again, like I mentioned, we're going to go in, we're going to create some information, or we're going to create this base class here just to start tracking some analytics. All right. The next thing that you may notice in here is that I'm using a service locator. So in this case, I'm just using this library called Splat, which offers a service locator to go find an instance for us of this item called iAnalytics. All right. So this next item's pretty important, I feel like, for analytics, because when we start talking about analytics, we have lots of different ways that we can implement analytics. And there's tons of different analytics providers. But what you start to notice over time is that each one of these analytics providers kind of offers the same subset of items. And going back to those sort of 5 key metric points there's sort of only so many items that we may be interested in. Your case may vary a little bit. But the thing to look at here, or the thing to consider here, is maybe to abstract out how you capture analytics, because, like I said, there's lots of different providers. We may want to end up implementing multiple providers in our applications and things like that. So sort of the next point here, along with those base classes, is to consider building out an analytics interface. I've got kind of a simple one that I built out for today's session. You can see I've got a couple of different methods in here. One to initialize some analytics tracking. One out here for maybe setting our user so we can identify who our user is. We've got some sort of page level or view level methods that we can capture out here for when our page is loaded or displayed. And then we've also got some, I'll call these sort of our utility methods, right? So if we have a particular event that we want to capture, maybe some error information that we want to capture and log out there, we could do that. And then finally, performance, okay? Again, this is sort of a subset of an analytics interface, but if you look at a lot of the different providers, and we'll look at a lot of those here today, you'll see that they kind of all fit into one of these categories. So depending on how we want to populate that data, each one will run it a little bit different here. We want to consider creating this interface. And then finally, with that interface here, it's something that we can end up, again, using a service locator. And we haven't talked about these too much yet, so I won't go into great detail. But we can use a service locator in this case to load up multiple different analytics providers. Maybe we want to get some Debug Diagnostics type analytics. Maybe we've got Amazon mobile analytics that we want to include. And maybe we want to also get some analytics from Segment, right? They all kind of work the same way. So instead of having to rewrite that code or kind of rework everything there, instead what we could do is just use a service locator to sort of build up, set up all those different analytics providers and just sort of run it in one single way. All right, before I go any further, I did see a couple of questions out here, so let me just see if I can answer these. We did have sort of a comment here for somebody doing something pretty similar. Yeah, if you're doing an ad platform, so the comment was, One of our users here, one of our people on here on today's session said, hey, I do a very similar type of thing with displaying ads on Android, right? So if you're going to be displaying ads in your application, it's very similar to analytics. The way that they display ads or things like that, where you may have multiple different ad providers. It's the same kind of great idea where building out those base classes, maybe building out interfaces to abstract out the functionality is a really great idea. Another comment here, what are the APIs we need in order to consume analytics? So I haven't talked about that one too much yet. We're going to spend sort of the last half of today's session talking about different analytics providers and what we need to do to actually get those set up and integrated with our applications. Awesome, very good. So I think that's all the questions that we had there at this point in time. So, with that, if we look at, with doing that little bit of setup work, again, right, if we kind of jump back to our page base here, what I can ensure is that each time I create a new page, whether it's my home page or whether it's my login page here, or if we look at my home page, right, I can ensure that I'm capturing that data uniquely or consistently rather across all of my different pages. So I don't need to rewrite it. If I've got some particular items, I could put those in on each page, but at a core, base classes are great. Likewise, if you find yourself wanting to track something a little bit more granular, so say for example, we want to track each and every time a user clicks on a button, it's not just left up to sort of higher level items like a page. You could do the same thing here. In this case, I've got a Xamarin.Forms button, and I just created a new implementation of it called tracking button. All right, and again, each time this button gets clicked or each time this button gets set up here, I just introduce a new click handler, and then behind the scenes, I'm going to use that service locator to find all my different analytics providers, and then I'm just going to log out this event, and in this case, I'm going to call it a user interaction. We'll say it happened on whatever our containing page is. We're going to track out a user interaction, and then we'll just grab the display text from our button, right? So if our user clicked that display text, that's all we really want to know, right? So it's not, it's not just on your view controllers or your activities or your pages here for on forms. You can really get granular on this, and if you have particular controls, if you find yourself doing something twice, doing the same thing twice essentially, you may want to consider building a base class off of it and extending it that way. Right? So if we actually look at our application or our implementation of our page then, so if we go back to our login here, what's really nice about this is I know that I'm capturing, every time my page is loaded and unloaded and displayed to a user. If we want to do anything in addition then, we can use that service locator to capture that information. So here, for example, in my login button being clicked, I've got some sort of one-off or instance data that I want to capture. In this case, I want to know, hey, that my user, that I'm actually setting my user for my application. This might be important for identifying my user over time. Maybe we're going to want to capture something like their username or their email address, and we'll use that to know that, or use that to know over multiple sessions how our user is, actually using our application and making use of our services there. Right. If I also want to capture off something simple like an event here, just want to say, we had a login attempted. If you get a lot of people complaining about things like, hey, I couldn't log in or something failed when I tried to log in here, we could capture sort of status events, right? So that maybe we need to make some user interface tweaks. For example, if we go back to our app here, and if I pull out my username, if I try to click login without a username, it's not actually going to allow me to log in. But our users might not know that, right? I don't actually have anything visual showing my users that we must have a username. There's no asterisks on there or anything like that. So, capturing out when a user clicks that login button, maybe with some context to see, did they actually provide a username, and things like that can be important for you, or can be helpful for you later on, just to find out, people keep on trying to log in without a username or without a password or something like that. Maybe we should change some visual representation on the screen or something like that, right? Going further then, or just to kind of extend it out here for just a second, it's not limited to just our one, if we're talking about forms, it's not, building these base classes isn't just going to be limited to our PCL project or anything like that. I do, in this case, I do like using something like a service locator to do that, because then if we do have analytics providers that maybe need to be implemented on a platform-by-platform basis, we could still do some of that work out here. For example, out in our iOS project, in our app delegate, which is sort of our startup project here for iOS, we could still do some work and just register out with that service locator, right? So it gives us multiple ways if we've got platform-specific implementations, if we've got PCL, if we've got solutions for tracking analytics that work with PCLs. Service locator, I feel like, works pretty well, just to kind of register stuff all over the place and then generically start using it in our application. There's a whole session in Xamarin University, so if you're not familiar with doing any work with service locators or anything like that, or working across platforms, I believe it's the advanced cross-platform session. Mark, I'm sure, knows exactly which one it is. I can't remember the number offhand, but if you're not familiar with service locators, there is a session in Xamarin University. Highly recommend it. Really great content in there. Okay, so like I said, just a few items here we want to cover, talk about those base classes and sort of the importance there. So again, if anybody has any questions about those base classes or why it's important, please do let me know. I'll be glad to spend some more time talking over it. All right, so now that we kind of have an idea of some small or quick tweaks that we can make to our apps, what I'd like to talk over next are different analytics providers. So what we're going to go through here is not going to be comprehensive. This is my quick warning up front. There are tons and tons and tons of analytics providers. Again, I just picked out a few. These are ones that I know to be pretty popular, ones that I've implemented for clients before, ones that I've gotten good feedback on before, and things like that. So I'm just going to kind of talk over these from a high-level perspective, show everybody how to get them integrated and set up, and then kind of go from there. All right, so what we're going to be looking at here for our analytics providers, like I mentioned, is we're going to have 6 that we talk about. Our first one's going to be sort of our base one here. It's our instrumentation and diagnostics. This is sort of our developer analytics. And then we're going to have 5 other products or company products, right? So we're going to look at Amazon's analytics, Parse, Segment, Google Analytics, and then finally we'll wrap up looking at Xamarin.Insights. Okay, so this one's pretty important. And also, I feel like a little bit overlooked here on mobile. Instrumentation and sort of our diagnostics logging here is super important for us as developers. If it's something as simple as just writing out to system.diagnostics.debug.writeline, we could find out how things are going before we ever ship a product. Even if it's just small stuff here, right? Like finding out, hey, did my variable pass correctly from page 1 to page 2, or hey, did I actually get the information that I expected back from this API, or is my API coming back and giving me that information in a timely manner? What we could start by doing is just create a real simple sort of localized diagnostics analytics or instrumentation to give us information about our application before we ever integrate a separate third party. Right? There's other ways you could do this. Today we're going to look at a simple implementation. Again, if you want to use a logger like nlog or anything like that, you can definitely do that. I just kind of want to show you a simple implementation that could give us a lot of that upfront information that is somewhat hard to capture, or that we would have to do maybe with break lines and things like that. And as we all know, if you put break lines in, or if you maybe miss a break line, you could really easily miss capturing a variable, the state of a variable or the data of a variable, and then you have to go rerun your application and actually find out, put your breakpoint on there, find out what the variable was at that point, and things like that. So really quick, we'll look at some instrumentation for our apps. The one thing else that I find out that doing this works really well for on mobile here is capturing information that's sometimes visually quantifiable or hard to visually quantify. So that would be things like padding or margins or icon sizing and things like that. You could always again put breakpoints in there and kind of look at that data. But if you're comparing a bunch of things and you're like, well, I think that's 8 points over, but it should be 10 points. Instrumentation here gives us just a really nice way to maybe log out, hey, you are, this is actually 10 points over, or anything like that. Again, without having to put a debugger on, or do any additional work. Really helpful if you're working across platforms or if you're working across devices on Android or even iOS nowadays to ensure that things are spaced properly and looks good. All right, so if we want to implement something pretty simple out there like that debug diagnostics, what we can start off with here is out in our Xamalytics project. I've got a provider out here that's going to be in our services folder, and you can see I've got a service implementation. So I've called this one Debug Diagnostics. Again, we've built out that analytics provider. So what we're going to do is just implement that interface and ensure that we've got all of our setup enabled here for our analytics provider. All right, our key methods in here, our first key method in here is going to be our initialize. So in this case, we really only want to do this when we have a debugger attached. All right, so we can leverage this namespace here, or leverage this API here, and we could say if our debugger is attached, then we could know, hey, we are in debug mode, and we actually want to capture this data. You know, debug diagnostics aren't something that we really want to ship out with a production application. You wouldn't want somebody to sit out there and listen to your debug diagnostics and maybe get information out there, like user information or anything like that. So you may want to put a limit on there for, you know, is attached, or you could even put a compiler directive just to, you know, blow all this away if you're in debug or something like that. But from there, really all I'm going to do in this logging here is just write out to our diagnostics console, or debug console rather. So just do some formatting. We're going to take in information here, for example, where we'll get in maybe our primary identifier. We might get in some additional user properties. So if we have some information maybe about, you know, a login ID and then maybe a first name and a last name, we'll just take that information, concatenate it all together, and write it out to our debug output there. And that's kind of how this whole analytics interface works. Okay, so if we sort of look through here, our view loaded, and kind of work through, it's more or less just rinse and repeat. But again, the nice thing about this is without ever having to go to a third-party provider, I can just start using these analytics in my application. And if we look out here in our app, what you'll see in our application output here is a bunch of different loading. So you could say, hey, I had my view displayed for start down here. It was my login that was displayed, and I might want to see my log time. If we go to maybe a more interesting screen here, let's just type in Mike again for our user. We could log in. You can see, you know, we showed our page here for start. We might want to capture some information when that next button is clicked. Let me see here. So you can see I've got some interaction information that I could look at here where I'm tracking out when my user clicked the start button, right? So I could see that they were on the home page. This was a user interaction item. They clicked that next button, and we could capture the time that they did it at. If we want to do any kind of performance information or metrics on here as well, for example, on this page, we want to find out how long it takes people to choose their platform. We want to know if it's a quick decision. Is it something that they mill about? If it's something that they mill about, we might want to, you know, provide some better guidance on this page or give some feedback to our user to say like, hey, you know, don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world. And so we could capture that information here, right, in our app, or we could capture that information, excuse me, using our analytics provider. So I could see, oh, hey, you know, they spent about 45 seconds out here on this page before they chose their platform of arcade, right? So just a real simple way to go and capture information along the way, you know, as you're building your application. Again, you could use it for lots of different points, but really good for you just to jump in and say like, hey, how long did I spend on that page, or what was my workflow? I know that's always a great one to go back to is how did I get to this page? You know, if you've got varying different ways to navigate to pages in your application, you might say, did I click on page 1, then 2, then 3? Or did I go to page 1 to 2 to 4 to 3, or something like that, right? So we could use this just to kind of jump back. You could put it in like a log, you know, log parse or something like that. Just take this information and get it before you go out anywhere. All right, so again, simple information. This is sort of analytics for us, I'm going to call it, right? It's for us as developers. Next up then is we have our Amazon Mobile Hub. So this is kind of a newer offering by Amazon to provide some analytics into your applications. If anybody uses AWS services, it's kind of a really nice way to get this integrated in, or to include AWS, or to include, excuse me, mobile analytics if you're already on the AWS platform there. So if you've already got your data storage, if you're doing authentication, it's in some ways kind of a no-brainer just to throw this in and start using that Amazon Mobile Hub out there as well. It is free for up to 100 million events per month. So if it's probably most applications I feel like go under there. If you get over 100 million events per month, you're probably doing something right. So you should be in good shape there. If you're interested in using this provider, what you want to do is jump out here to aws.amazon.com/mobile, and they've got all the registration and things like that. So some great pros about using Amazon Mobile Hub. First pro is that it's fully built out for support with Xamarin and .NET. We'll take a look at how we get this set up here in just a moment. But it's just a native PCL, right? So that PCL library could be used for .NET. We could use it on our Xamarin.Android and iOS projects. I'll show you how we could use it here in Forms today as well. Pretty easy to get set up. It's actually just a few items. Again, generous monthly allowances. It's pretty hard to hit that 100 million event per month mark. If you're already using AWS, it's a great fit for AWS users. Big cons out here is that it is still a pretty new product, so their analytics platform isn't as in depth or doesn't offer maybe as many features as some of our other providers. But again, it's young. I would expect them to continue to develop on it and to add some of those features on there. And then as well, they don't provide any sort of out-of-the-box exception information or tracking on there. You can grab it yourself, we can track it, but there's sort of no immediate out-of-the-box exception tracking for us. All right, so if we were interested in implementing those Amazon Analytics in our app, our first step out here would be to sign up for a developer account with Amazon AWS. All right, once we get set up in there, one of the items that you'll notice that they offer now is this mobile hub. And so the mobile hub kind of gives you a way to go and configure all different settings and providers for data for our mobile applications. So if you're looking to provide user sign-ins, things like that, push notifications, if you've got data storage, right, if you want to go and capture things like key-value pairs for your data, you can do all that here. But for today's session, what we're interested in is App Analytics. So when you click into App Analytics, what that will do is bring you into our analytics platform, right? And you can see I've got our Xamalytics provider set up here. And once we get our new dashboard set up, the next thing that we need to do is integrate it with our app. Amazon's done a really good job of making this dead simple. So if we're interested in integrating it with our application, and if you don't already have it set up already, they give you a big shiny button that says, set up your application for their analytics provider. And what you'll notice out here right on the end is they've got a tab specifically for Xamarin. Okay, so I won't go through step by step what we're doing here. I know everybody can probably follow this along, but really the key pieces that we have here is just sort of this is to go obviously and go grab our NuGet packages. But our key piece that we have here is just this registration item to set up our analytics provider. This is the actual ID for the application we're using. I'll probably go through and nuke all this stuff up after today's session, so feel free to use this ID if you want, but it will probably go away in a little bit. But really, all we need to do is just register their analytics manager in our application, and then we're more or less ready to go with it. So if we were to look back at our code here, right, if we were to go back to our application, what we need to do to get it set up is just to include a handful of packages here. So we've got our AWS SDKs. We've got 4 packages to include our Cognito identity, core, mobile analytics, and security token. All right. Next up then, what we're going to do is we're going to set up that analytics provider in our interface. So if I come down to services here, in this case, the Amazon Analytics provider works as a PCL, so I could do all this in sort of my core Xamalytics project. And what I want to do is just make sure that I do my initialize and setup work to get my mobile analytics provider running. Right, so just like we saw out there on their website, we're going to make a call to our mobile analytics manager. We'll end up passing in those IDs and that identity pool ID that we had seen on their site there. And then we'll just make a call out here finally to resume session. And what that's going to do is set up our session for data capture. With the AWS analytics provider, then, anytime we want to capture data, they have this idea of recording events. So what I'll do inside of my method implementations here is I'll take the information that I have passed in. They have this object called a custom event. I'll populate that event with some attribute information like the view name that we hit. And then finally, I'll make a call out here to record event and push that information out to the server. All right. Again, that's sort of how their analytics provider works. So, as we look through our other methods here, they're more or less rinse and repeat, right? Go grab the information passed in, create that custom event, and record the event. Sometimes we'll pass in some additional information. So, for example, here, when we log an error, we might want to capture in the title of the error, maybe the actual error message here as well. But we'll just add in some additional attributes for our event, and then we'll save that data out. So it's a very simplistic API, very easy to use, and get integrated in our application. And again, finally, really all we need to do to get it set up here, to finally get it set up here, is we're just going to create an instance of our Amazon mobile analytics provider, and we'll just pass in our IDs, and we could start capturing that data. Right, so we'll get that information, we'll just get those IDs in there, and then from that point in time, that service provider will take care of the rest. Okay, so super easy to integrate, very simplistic setup and everything like that. Back onto their dashboard then, so as we get that data captured and as we get it coming in here, you can see, as I mentioned, they've got just a very simple dashboard for viewing our information. So if we look out here, I'll come into our overview. We could look at our daily active users, so we could see how many users are coming into our application. Just me demoing the app, right? So not a lot of different users coming in here, but pretty simple to get set up. Again, fairly simplistic dashboard for getting our information out. It's not as full featured. We can't do a lot of the drill down maybe to find out user flows and things like that. But if you're just looking for some simple analytics, something to get you up and running, super easy to get integrated and going there. And again, finally, if you are using AWS for storage and things like that, they do offer some really great ways to kick out your data out to S3 or Redshift. So if you want to get in there and start running queries on it, if you feel like their dashboard's maybe not giving you as much out of the data that you've sent up, you could really go in there and build out that information yourself fairly easily, right? But pretty cool dashboard, like I said, pretty simplistic dashboard, but a great way, super simple to get you up and running. Again, we could see how many times our users have clicked some data out here for those game consoles, things like that. Right, next up is our Parse Analytics. Parse Analytics is going to be our analytics provider, giving us information. Again, Parse Analytics, Parse is a tool that can be used to sort of cover all of our different platforms, or excuse me, cover the entire back end of our platform. So if you're looking for something to do authentication and data storage, push notification, stuff like that, Parse gives it to us. Again, analytics are just one thing that it provides. So we've got a, it is a full platform. Analytics is just one of those things that it gives to us. In terms of usage, it is unlimited free analytics capture. So if you're looking to use Parse, you can capture as much data as you like out there, totally free. They don't have a pay option for their analytics. If you're interested in getting set up with it, you can actually jump out to parse.com/product/analytics, get it set up there. Just like we saw out there for our Amazon Analytics, they do have native support libraries for .NET. We do have to implement them on a platform basis. They don't offer a full PCL yet, but it's pretty easy to get it set up out there, and it's consistent across our platforms. A very easy setup, just a couple of different tokens to send in there. They do have that full application backend support if you're looking for that. The one thing that is tough, though, I guess, about Parse is that if you are looking to use it as a full platform, it does require that you learn sort of the ins and outs of their platform. And then finally, there's a lot of manual configuration that you might have to do. So not a lot of the out-of-the-box type of stuff there. In terms of setting up Parse for our application then, just like we saw out here for AWS, we want to jump out to their site, sign up for a Parse account. When we get that Parse account set up, the first thing that we're going to want to do out here is get our keys, right? So when we create our new Parse account, we'll create our application. We'll get some sign-in keys that we're going to use to identify our application, right? So you can see I've got my application here. They've got a .NET key that we'll use. They provide really great documentation out here at Parse, so if you are getting up and running, if it's your first implementation of analytics, it's a really great workflow here. They go into great depth to tell you how to use all their objects and how to capture everything. In terms of setup then, back in our code, what we'll need to do is we do need to set this up on a platform-by-platform basis. So, if you are looking to target, Xamarin.Forms, you will have to make a library maybe that targets Android and another library that targets iOS, just because they don't have, like I said, that full PCL support. But setting up their analytics provider again is fairly straightforward. It's just a one-line call here to parse client.initialize, where we'll give it our application ID and .NET key there. At that point in time, our analytics provider is initialized, and then we're just going to run through and make their different tracking calls. So they've got different events that we could track, very similar to what we saw out there with Amazon, where we'll give it sort of this key value pair information. All right, so very similar from that standpoint. They do have, let me come down here. We're going to use the same one. So they do have this event tracking. Again, pretty similar from their implementation standpoint, where we're just going to track sort of data, key value pairs, and whatnot. Their user interface is pretty nice from an analytics standpoint. So again, we could find out things like our daily active installations. If we have some events that we want to capture, for example, login counts and stuff like that, we could track that information here as well. A little bit more visual than we had out there from the Amazon provider, but again, still pretty easy to use, pretty simplistic to get up and running. All right, our next provider here is our Segment Analytics, and Segment Analytics is kind of an interesting one. So it's sort of an analytics gateway. The idea here is what they're going to do is they're going to take data from that you send up to them and allow you to aggregate that out to different analytics providers. So they take in, your calls that you send from there. They're going to push those out to different analytics or configured analytics providers or other integrations. Like if you're using email, third-party email services or monitoring services, we could send out that tracked information out there to them as well. Again, they've got full support for .NET for Xamarin, so super easy to get up and integrated here. If you're looking to do the only big con is that once you get that data to them, you still do need to do additional configuration to take that data and push it out to your other providers. So a little bit more work that you have to do there once you get your data sent to them. All right, setup for Segment, again, pretty straightforward. In terms of site setup here, let me actually come back out to my console. And this part I think is really cool. Once you sign up for an account and you get your user interface, or excuse me, once you sign up for an account, you'll just want to jump out here, get your keys for your project, make sure you get your project ID and your right key here. In terms of integration, again, we're just going to fill in that provider, and it's pretty simplistic to get it initialized. It's just a call to analytics.initialize with our API key, and then more or less just filling in the blanks for their APIs. They do provide some neat ways for us to identify our users. So if we do want to capture information about their usernames and things like that, it gives us a real simple a couple method calls to get that data. But basically from there, what we're going to want to do is just use their screen tracking and just kind of provide information about when our users log into a screen, when they leave a screen. If we have any other information that we want to push on there as well, we could do that for our different navigation items for our tracking. They do have the ability to track sort of more generic items or more ambiguous items. So if we have something like errors that we want to track, we can just make a call out here to the track property to get that data, or events, right? We could use that for events, and also for performance, we could just make calls out to their track method to get that information. What's really neat about them, though, is they're probably one of the quickest turnaround times in terms of analytics. So, once we get our provider set up here and integrated into our app, if we were to actually look at the app running, and if we were to use this here, what we'll see is they've got this really great debug console that shows us information as it feeds in. All right, so if you're not sure about your analytics being set up or configured, you can get that information here right away without having to wonder, hey, is it going to take 10 or 15 minutes to come up? We could see it right here from this debugger. We could see the data that we had sent up here to our user interface really easily, right? And we can get an idea of how things are working. Again, segments are a big thing, is that they integrate with third-party providers. So if you want to use Mixpanel for additional analytics, or if you want to use AppQues or S3 to save off some of this data, that's what segment's big deal is. They're kind of an integration point for further analytics or further data storage or integration. We had a quick question come in here as well. Let me see if I can answer this quick. Do I have any thoughts about the stability of different analytics services? There's nothing worse than analytics code failing in your app by either throwing exceptions or just making your app really slow. Yeah, that's a really great question. Something, I mean, I can't speak to all of them. I know, some of these, some of our analytics providers are a little bit newer. Like the Amazon Web Services provider is a little bit newer here, and maybe not as full-featured, or it may still be prone to some issues. There are other services that I know have had issues from time to time here. I mean, if you're asking my opinion of probably the most stable and the most built out, it's easily Google Analytics, in my opinion. They do a lot of really smart stuff on a platform-by-platform basis to ensure that we're not stepping on our app's toes or anything like that. But as we'll see here in a moment, it's not exactly the easiest to get Google Analytics set up. It does take a little bit more configuration. But in terms of stability, I'd say Google Analytics is probably the best. I can't say too much about a lot of the other ones outside of that, to be honest with you. It'd probably be, I'd put Google Analytics as number one in terms of stability. All right, we've just got a couple other analytics providers. I know we're about at our hour here, so I'll see if I can work through these quick just to give you guys some information about our last two providers. As I mentioned here, Google Analytics is sort of the industry standard. It's the big boy out there. If you've done web development in the past, or if you're even roughly familiar with analytics, Google Analytics is probably something that you're familiar with. It's a great platform. They give you great looking visualizations and a great user interface to find out how your users are using your application. It's probably the most comprehensive analytics solution as well, in that it's got the really great dashboard. It's something that you could use on your website. It's something you could use on mobile. And they've got lots of great different APIs and things like that that you could call for different scenarios. As Xamarin users, or as mobile users, it is a little bit more of a complicated setup. As we saw in our first three out there, we really didn't have to do too much in terms of setup. A lot of them were just sort of one-liners that you would pass data into. But we do have some libraries to help us out there and make it better. But again, it's not sort of as dead simple as sort of one call on each platform. If you are interested in using Google Analytics in your app, the first thing that you will need to do is make sure that you've got a user account registered in the Google Developers Console. So in this case here, I've created a new Google developer account. I've got my app registered out here. I called it Xamalytics. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to make sure that we've got our APIs enabled. So Google offers lots of different APIs. What we're interested in here for today is going to be our Analytics API. So we're going to do our Analytics API. Come into here. If you don't have it enabled, just make sure you enable that API. And the next thing that we need to do is we need to provide credentials, or we need to set up credentials to use their API. This is really where the complication comes into play for getting these set up. Okay, so we're going to need to create unique credentials for both iOS and Android and any other platform that we use. So if we're getting set up, we'll look at iOS first. We want to create an iOS key. What we need to do is we need to give it a name. So we'll call it Xamalytics, right? Let's cancel out here. We'll look at our API key here. We're going to create a name for our application. We'll just give it a generic name as Xamalytics. And then next up, what we need to do is we need to provide the bundle identifier for our iOS application. This needs to match up perfectly. So whatever your bundle identifier is in your app, make sure it matches what you provide out here. Out on Android then, it's a little bit different. So on Android, what we need to do is we'll just give it a generic name here. We also need to provide our package name. So again, we want to make sure that the package name we provide here matches up with the package name that we use in our application. But then what we also need to provide is this SHA-1 certificate fingerprint. What this is essentially our unique certificate fingerprint that's used for when we sign our application. So this goes back to that idea of a key store, if you're familiar with that. To get that information, what you need to do is you'll have to drop down to a terminal or a command line, and there is a command that you need to run to get your full key store path here. So this is the one that I ran to get my debug key store here for Xamarin. You can see I get that whole big store, or that whole big SHA-1 key out of here. One key point, or one key thing to point out here, is that you're probably using a different key store between debug and release. So if you're setting up your application, make sure if you're using two different key stores that you get it set up once on Android, and you get it set up, you get it set up once maybe for debug, and again for your release key store, right? So probably using different key stores depending on debug and release. Just make sure that you get both of those registered out here with that fingerprint. Okay. From there, then, that's sort of step one. So it's saying that, hey, we've got applications that want to use analytics. Next up, you need to create an analytics account. So that's out at analytics.google.com. Out there, you'll need to create a new analytics website. So I created a Xamalytics mobile application. And the key thing that we need out here is our application identifier. So you can see I've got this UA 695 application ID, right? That's going to tell us all of our different info, or this is going to identify where we're tracking our analytics to. Okay? With those key pieces of information, again, right, setting up our bundle identifiers right and our application IDs right and things like that, what we're going to need to do is make sure that our applications are set up the same. Okay, so we'll just look at iOS here. We want to make sure that our bundle identifier matches up with what we provided there. So we're good there. Next up, we're going to need to pull in some packages to make sure that we can run these on our platforms. Like I mentioned before, Google doesn't offer sort of a PCL solution or a native .NET solution for us here, Xamarin developers. So what we're going to use is a bound-up version of their iOS and Android solutions. So to get that, I've got that down here. To get that, what you will want to do on iOS is add in this package Xamarin.google.ios.analytics. That'll give us our wrapper there for the Google Analytics and iOS. On Android, we're going to want to make sure we include Xamarin.googleplayservices.analytics. That'll give us our wrapper for Android then. And then finally, we'll need to do our setup to get our analytics provider out here. So it's a little bit more in-depth for Google stuff. What we need to do is we need to get an instance of our analytics provider. This is the implementation for Android. Looks a little bit different, where we need to pass in context, right? So when we create our object here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to give it a context along with our tracking ID. But we need to do some setup here to set up to get our analytics provider set up. And then we need to make sure that we call it out here and everything works well with our tracker. So by this time, if we make once we get our analytics provider set up here, we provided our tracking ID. If everything went well, we should get our tracker set up, and we'll be able to tell whether or not it's been initialized and if we actually have a tracker instance that looks good. So if all that's good, we're ready to go and start tracking with Google's Analytics. Google's Analytics has a lot of different ways we could track data. I'll just kind of show you some high-level ones here. For example, they use this item called a hit builder, where what we're going to do is we're going to create, in this case, an event, and we're going to track off some category information. We're going to say, hey, it's a user interface information, user interface category item that occurred. We want to say that a view's been displayed, and then we'll provide some information on the label that was, or excuse me, some information about the view that's been displayed. So they've got this nice kind of fluent API for setting up all of our different calls here. Right, and super easy to set up. Again, it's pretty robust. I'm going to run through this quick. I will have the code available after today's session, but super robust, great way to capture your data. If we're talking about their website then, final thing to look at here is their website, where their dashboard is fantastic, right? Tons of different ways to view analytics information and things like that, where you could drill in if we want to find out information about real-time use. We can see right now I had the application open here. I was tracking that. If we click out, we might be able to see. It might show some user interaction that might pump up to 1. Sometimes takes a minute just to pick up there. But we could find out, in any case, we could find out really good information about our events. Let me get right down here. This one I like quite a bit. We can look at our behavior flow. So we could find out that our users, which platform that they're coming from. We could find out the different screens that they go to, if they drop out of the application at certain screens, things like that. So we could find out exactly how they use our application, maybe when they leave our application. They do have ways to capture crashes and exceptions and things like that as well. So really great platform. Like I said, a little bit more setup to do here to get it up and running, but overall not terrible. We had a question come in. The question was, am I correct in thinking that Google Analytics won't be available for apps running in China? To be honest with you, I don't have an answer for that. If anybody else from our user base here knows, that'd be great, but I honestly don't know if they track in China or not. May get blocked. Even if you're capturing this data, might get blocked by a firewall or something like that. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you there. But so in any case, yeah. Google Analytics, great provider for us for analytics information. A little bit more difficult, but overall not too bad. Finally then, last one we'll look at here today is our Xamarin.Insights. This is sort of a newer product here. Xamarin.Insights is sort of the fully, if you're a Xamarin user, is a great option, super easy to get set up. It's free for Xamarin customers. They do have some new business and enterprise plans that provide some additional features and functionality out there as well. It is dead simple to get integrated. It takes like a minute. It's like seriously though, like dead simple. You could get away with doing a Xamarin.Insights implementation, a full implementation that tracks pages and does all kinds of good stuff for you in just one line of code. If we're wanting to capture exceptions, this is honestly my best recommendation for capturing exception information out of your applications. Again, does a really great job of showing us, full stack traces and things like that. Pretty good implementation here of user behavior. So if we want to find out how our users are using our applications, does a good job there. The only really big con is that it is still in preview release, so it's not 100% ready yet. It's been out there. I think it's getting really close, but it is still in preview release. So if we want to look at the setup here for Insights, just head out to insights.xamarin.com. Again, if you're a Xamarin user, then you can get in here and get that basic account for free. Once you get your account set up, the only thing that we really need here is our API key. All right. Using that API key, then we can set up our service. Right. So we've got our Xamarin.Insights implementation. We've got an initializer. There's a method that we need to call to get our insights set up here, and I'll show you that method in just a second. But really all we need to do is just make calls out here. We've got really good APIs for identifying users, right? So if we want to track who our user is with any additional properties, great ways to track, call track out here to get information about, as our users go around our application, see exactly what they're doing. Again, pretty simple, API to integrate with here. But still fairly robust, right? So it's not just simple information. We can actually pass in these dictionaries of information and capture fairly complex data, right? So looks pretty similar to a lot of our other implementations here. It's kind of a theme for today, if you haven't noticed. It all looks pretty similar here in terms of tracking. Our final item here is that for our setup for it, it's fairly straightforward. It's just a matter of making a call here to Xamarin.Insights initialize and passing in that API key. if you were just to make this one API key here without any of our other tracking in our application or anything like that, just with that one-liner, you'll get tracking for exceptions in your application. You can get tracking for page views and things like that in your application. It's really awesome. So, I mean, if you're looking for the easiest thing to implement, again, it's a one-liner. You can just toss that in. You'll start getting exception information and things like that out of your app without having to do any more work. So, can't recommend it enough, especially for its simplicity. All right. I know that there were some comments asking about other analytics providers. There are a ton of other ones. I know we've already gone a little bit over time here, so I do apologize. But there are so many other analytics providers that we couldn't cover for today. Crash Linux, Azure, Mixpanel, Flurry, Hockey App. There's tons of great ones. My recommendation for you is that if you are looking to use one of these providers, maybe keep that interface implementation sort of setup that I have out there in mind. You should be able to plug in, I feel like, any of these other analytics providers into an interface or into that kind of similar structure there and just start tracking away, right? So can't cover them all, just kind of want to get a few for today. If anybody's interested in looking at the code that I built out here, it is out at github.com/the8bot/Xamalytics. We'll make sure that we get that information out to everybody as well. But again, it's github.com/the8bot/Xamalytics. All right, and so with that, that's all of the content that I had presented for you, or prepared for you guys today. Again, sorry, I know we had it scheduled for an hour. I went a little bit long here. Apologize about that. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be glad to hang out and answer anything for you. If you want to go take it offline, you can get me at michael.stonis@8bot.com or at michaelstonis on Twitter, or you can get to me at my company website, 8bot.com.
Awesome, Michael. Thank you so much for that. I think this was great. Gives a great insight into analytics and different ways of using it, and also kind of a quick survey of a lot of the analytics services that are out there. I'll let Michael answer any questions as we go forward, but keep in mind we have another lecture coming up on November 9th with Brian Randall talking about DevOps and mobile apps. But thank you and have a great day, everybody. And if you want to stay on with Michael, that's great.
Thanks, everybody. If you're dropping off, thanks for joining. Let me see here. Get a couple of questions out here. Yep, we'll share out those code samples. Someone asked if I could share out those code samples. So again, let me grab that here. That's github.com/the8bot/Xamalytics. And we had another question out here. The question was, well, what should we take into consideration so we make sure we don't break any law related to user privacy? Yeah, I mean, first things first, probably go and check with if you have a local municipality or lawyer or something like that that's an expert in this. You may want to go, spend some money and have a chat with them. In particular, like I mentioned up front, if you're capturing any kind of user information, at a minimum, you should probably prompt that user. So having an end user license agreement or having some kind of a consent agreement that your users submit to, letting them know that you're tracking information on them, or that by either explicitly or implicitly using the application that that data is being tracked. Again, if you've got certain laws in the country that you live in, I am not an expert on that in any way, shape, or form, so I would make sure either to talk to, a great place I know by us is we have a lot of startup incubators here in Chicago that have tons of great people that provide information and feedback on that. So depending on where you're at, if you have one of those incubators, I know it's sort of an easy way to get in there and chat with somebody. If you don't have that local to you, I would say talk to a lawyer or somebody that works in that space, and see if they have any feedback. I mean, this is my cover my butt answer for you. I apologize. I may not have a better answer, but it's about as good as I could think of based on where you're at. We had another question here. Do any of the providers allow data to be stored in country rather than passing it across borders? That's a great question. As far as I know, the user or the analytics providers that we looked at here today are probably storing based on where they're located. Microsoft or Google, being bigger providers, probably have servers located worldwide. that they would store your data onto, but I'm not sure that any of them offer a guarantee that your data would be stored in country. If you're concerned about that, again, what I'd probably recommend doing is just sending an email out to one of those analytics providers and ask them, hey, is there like a special thing that we could do, or is there maybe a way that we could specify in our data, or specify in our data that we could store it on these servers. As I say this though out loud, I believe that Amazon might be the only one that gives us some of that information, and that when we specify our server out here, or when we specify our analytics providers, one of the things that we need to do is we need to pick a server that it's going to run on. Let me see here. Let me get out here. We need to pick servers that it's going to run on. So in this case, it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see this is actually running in the US East region. So Amazon might be a way to go and configure that for a particular location, depending on where you're at there. Again, depending on where you're located, Amazon may not have servers in your country. So always good just to try to reach out to those analytics providers and see if they have any feedback for you. Let's see any other questions. Mark, I don't know if you saw any that came through that I maybe missed.
I think we're good. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Thank you, Michael, for taking time out of your schedule. I know you're really busy.
Yeah.
But we appreciate your expertise and coming in and talking to us.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
Awesome, guys. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.